years, whispers filled the air. Back in 2013, Lockheed Martin teased the world with the SR-72, the so-called son of Blackbird. A plane that, they promised, could reach Mach 6 times the speed of sound. It sounded unstoppable. But for 12 years, nothing ever flew. Only concept art, only hype. Fans waited, dreamed, and slowly they lost faith. The legend of the Blackbird's return turned into silence. Until now, on May 20th, 2025 at Edwards Air Force Base, something finally happened. The US flew a real hypersonic aircraft. Not a rumor, not a sketch, a real flight. The Hermeus quarter-horse Mk-1, powered by a turbine-based combined cycle engine, took to the skies. And in one test, it proved what the SR-72 never could. For years, the future of speed lived in shadows. Now it lives in open air. The world just changed. Because the mystery plane era is over. The US is no longer chasing rumors. It is flying real hypersonics and racing to field them by 2026. This is how one test just killed the SR-72 hype and revealed the true future of American speed. The year was 2013. Lockheed Martin dropped a bombshell. They unveiled sleek images of a new aircraft, the SR-72, called the son of Blackbird. The promise was bold. This machine would reach Mach 6 times the speed of sound. A plane so fast it could outrun missiles, strike before enemies could react, and change the meaning of air power. The key, they said, was a new engine, a turbine-based combined cycle system. It would act like a normal jet at takeoff, then transform into a scramjet, pushing into hypersonic speeds. One engine, two modes, one revolution. The idea captured imaginations everywhere. For aviation fans, it was the return of a legend. The original SR-71 Blackbird was already unmatched, a spy plane that broke records in the Cold War. Now, its son, the SR-72, was promised to go even faster. People dreamed of seeing it roar across the skies. Media headlines hyped it as the future of flight artists drew stunning concept art. But behind the headlines was one problem. Nothing ever left the ground. Not a prototype, not a demonstrator, not even a confirmed budget line. Year after year, the world waited. The legend grew larger, but the hangars stayed silent. For 12 years, the SR-72 existed only as a promise, and slowly, the hype became a shadow. So what was really happening while the son of Blackbird dominated dreams, but never touched the sky? While the SR-72 stayed in headlines, real progress moved in silence. By 2021, DARPA and the US Air Force were already flying real scramjets. The program was called HAWC, Hypersonic Air-Breathing Weapon Concept. And unlike the SR-72, it actually flew. In secret tests, a B-52 bomber carried the vehicle high into the sky. Then it launched, the scramjet igniting. The result shocked insiders. Sustained Mach 5+ cruise. Not for seconds, but for real minutes. This was not PowerPoint art. This was hardware, flying/burning, proving. For the first time, the US had data from actual hypersonic flight, and it happened while the SR-72 was still just renders and rumors. The contrast was sharp. On one side, glossy images, magazine covers, endless hype. On the other, classified flights, real numbers, proven success. Each one confirmed what engineers had dreamed of since the Cold War, that a scramjet could sustain hypersonic speed. The SR-72 legend promised a Mach 6 aircraft, but in truth, every burn stretched the limits of materials and design. It wasn't a headline grabber, it wasn't a mystery plane, but it was the quiet proof that hypersonics were finally moving from dream to reality. For the engineers, this was a turning point. For the world, it was a warning. Because while the SR-72 hype dragged on, America's real hypersonic program was already flying. But scramjets were only one side of the story. What about America's biggest boost glide gamble? Not every program ends in victory. By 2024, the US Air Force faced a brutal truth. The Air Force had no choice. The program was officially canceled. For American hypersonics, it was a public embarrassment. Headlines tore into the failure, and even allies began to ask, could the US really lead in the hypersonic race? For the engineers, it was a gut punch. Years of work, billions in funding, all ending in ashes. Instead, it became a warning about rushing programs without enough tests, a warning about politics pushing faster than physics, and a warning that not every idea survives the brutal sky. Trust in America's programs shook. For the public, failure does not end the race. If Boost Glide collapsed, what would rise to replace it? On May 20th, 2025, the silence finally broke. At Edwards Air Force Base, a new aircraft took to the sky. It wasn't from Lockheed Martin. It wasn't a secret black project. It came from a startup few had ever heard of, Hermeus. The plane was the quarter-horse Mk-1, and its flight was historic. For the first time in decades, a private company had flown a high-speed aircraft at Edwards. Not a concept, not a rumor, a real machine leaving the runway. The quarter horse wasn't just another test bed. The same kind of system the SR-72 had promised but never delivered. One engine that could act as a turbine at low speeds, then shift to ramjet mode as the speed climbed. The very technology that defined the legend was now proven by a startup. For aviation fans, the symbolism was massive. A tiny team with limited funding had done what a global giant could not. Where the SR-72 stalled, Hermeus delivered. The flight was short, but the message was loud. The future of hypersonics no longer belonged to glossy renders and distant promises. It belonged to companies willing to test, to fail, and to fly again. The quarter horse was small, but it proved something big. The race for Mach speeds was now open to more than just defense giants. The legend of the SR-72 began to fade, because here was real metal in the air. But what exactly makes the quarter horse different from the myth it replaced? The true secret of the quarter horse was inside its engine. Hermeus called it the Chimera, a turbine-based combined cycle, or TBCC. It was the same concept the SR-72 had teased for years. But now it was real. Then once the speed climbed, a pre-cooler system kicked in. This dropped the air temperature, keeping the engine from melting. And then came the switch. The turbojet shut down, the ramjet lit up. In one flight, the quarter horse could go from slow to hypersonic without changing engines. The very dream that powered the SR-72 legend was proven, just not by skunkworks. The aircraft itself was also different. It was modular, it was unmanned, it was a test bed, built to gather data fast, not to serve as an operational spy plane. That was the twist. The quarter horse wasn't trying to be the next Blackbird. It was trying to be something smarter. A platform to test hypersonic systems, validate engines, and push tech faster than the old defense model allowed. In that way, it was more useful. Because instead of waiting decades for a perfect aircraft, the US now had a flying lab. Every flight meant new numbers. Every switch from turbojet to ramjet meant real progress. The Blackbird sequel never came, but something better did. A machine proving the core idea worked. Still, one question loomed. This was a test bed. But could this technology ever carry real weapons? Could it transform from proving ground to combat system? The future of hypersonics was no longer just about planes. By 2026, the focus turned to weapons. The program was called HACM, the Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile. Its target, first flight in fiscal year 2026. Unlike the SR-72, this was not a dream of distant spy planes. It was a missile, built to fly, fight, and strike. A weapon small enough to hang under a fighter jet. A weapon fast enough to punch through enemy defenses. The shift was clear. No more glossy renders. No more endless teasers. This was about operational power, something that could be armed, launched, and deployed. For the US, it was the difference between concepts and combat. Every fleet, every bomber, every allied base wanted hypersonics they could actually use. And that made the HACM the centerpiece of America's next arsenal. For engineers, it was vindication. The same scramjet work that had lived in shadows was now transforming into real weapons. For commanders, it was relief. Hypersonics were no longer just a race of prestige. They were a necessity. The emotional weight was heavy because the stakes were no longer about a single plane in the sky. They were about survival in the next war. The race to arm fleets and bombers was now real, urgent, unstoppable. But what did this shift mean for the legendary SR-72 itself? Was it the future, or had its time already passed? By 2025, the truth could no longer be denied. The SR-72 was never real. No flights, no prototypes, no confirmed budget priority. For over a decade, it lived only in renders and glossy magazine covers. Meanwhile, the Air Force had already made its choice. It doubled down on unmanned hypersonics, test beds like Quarter Horse, and weapons like ACM. These programs gathered data, delivered real results, and promised scalable arsenals. The SR-72, by contrast, delivered nothing. The myth that once fueled endless articles and fan speculation was exposed. The legend survived only as concept art. Pictures without planes, dreams without hardware. For aviation fans, it was painful. They had hoped for a true Blackbird sequel, a machine that would dominate the skies like its Cold War father. Instead, they got silence. The world realized that speed was no longer about secret projects. It was about scalable systems. Not one mystery plane in the shadows, but fleets of hypersonic missiles, tested openly, deployed widely. The tension grew with every new announcement. The US answered not with the SR-72, but with practical programs ready for the next war. The death of the SR-72 hype was not just an end, it was a turning point. The curtain finally lifted. What mattered was not secrecy. What mattered was scalability. But what is the hidden truth about America's hypersonic future? The real secret of America's hypersonic push was never the SR-72. It was the new model now taking shape. Not a single mystery plane hidden in shadows, but a network of unmanned aircraft and missiles tested in the open. By 2025, the path was clear. The US would not wait decades for one perfect spy plane. It would field modular systems, each cheaper, faster, and easier to replace. The Hermes Quarter Horse proved the engine. Together, they formed a different kind of arsenal, cheap enough to build in numbers, fast enough to break any defense, and scalable enough to shift from testbed to fleet. This was the opposite of the SR-72 mystique. No glossy art, no endless waiting, just real hardware in the air. The hidden truth was this: America had to kill the myth to build a real arsenal. And in doing so, it quietly launched a new revolution. One where speed was no longer rare, it was common. One where costs fell, but power grew. A fleet of hypersonic systems, cheap, fast, and deadly, was worth more than one legendary plane. The progressive tension could not be missed. China and Russia chased flashy platforms. The US invested in iterative flight tests, scaling results into deployable weapons. The race had changed. The world now faced not just rumors of American speed, but a wave of it. So how does this reshape the story of speed forever? The ultimate truth is this: America did not lose the SR-72. It outgrew it. The legend that once fueled dreams was no longer needed because hype gave way to hardware. The Hermes Quarter Horse proved the engine worked. The HACM program promised real weapons in service. The scramjet flights gave America the data the Blackbird's sun never delivered. What mattered was no longer glossy art or whispered rumors. What mattered was what actually flew. And by 2025, the silence ended. The sky shook with real tests. For fans, it was emotional. From 12 years of waiting to one startup flight that shifted the balance. For the US, it was historic. The mystery plane era had ended. The scalable weapon era had begun. This was the real lesson. Power is not built on legends. It is built on what can fly, fight, and deploy. This is why one test in 2025 killed the SR-72 hype. And this is how the US revealed the true future of speed. So ask yourself, what matters more? A mythical aircraft or scalable weapons in service? The Blackbird's ghost still inspires. It fueled dreams, stirred imagination, and carried the weight of legend. But the future belongs to what actually flies. And in 2025, the US proved it had chosen flight over fantasy. We traced the hype of the SR-72. We saw the rise of real scramjets. We watched the ARRW collapse in public failure. We witnessed Hermes Quarter Horse take off and prove the engine worked. And we uncovered the hidden future, a network of scalable, deployable weapons. The story is clear. Legends inspire, but only hardware wins wars. Subscribe now for more cutting-edge defense stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines. And tell us, Did America make the right move leaving the SR-72 behind? Or should some legends still be built, no matter the cost?